in this afternoon. The session, I think its advertised name is Governance Session on Safeguarding KCSiE Updates. And I suppose it's Safeguarding, KCSiE Updates, because I am going to cover off both of those things. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting either remotely in person or any point previously, my name's Amy Chevin-Dooley. I'm Executive Director of Education across Marches Academy Trust, and I have oversight strategic responsibility for SEND, safeguarding and inclusions across our schools. So if I haven't had the fortunate chance to meet you, I hope to do so in coming weeks across this year. This training is, although obviously there's a formal element to it, absolutely feel free to jump in and ask questions. I've got two screens, so you might see me turn to the side, but I can see you, my screen's over here, so I can see any questions as they're coming in. Feel free to pop them in the chat. Similarly, feel free to pop your hand up or just come on and ask questions as we're going through. Similarly, if you're somebody that just needs to digest the information and you want the slides after, these will be shared with you from B as a PDF after the fact. There is a handout that we will refer to partway through, mainly because I don't want to just read a script through to you, and I think hopefully it'll be a helpful exercise. But if you want to make any notes or any questions, the kind of delivery part of this session, I'm always really mindful of not just talking at you for an extended period of time. I'm also really conscious to talk really fast. So if there's anything that you think that, oh, I'm not clear on that, I will absolutely circle back to it. I also don't want to drag it out longer than it needs to be if you're already okay with much of the things that I'm going to be running through. There will be a significant portion at the end of the session, however, for any questions. And as Bea has already said, she will stop the recording at that point for you to ask questions. If you want to stay on after when other people have gone, similarly, happy to answer questions. And a really key note, I'm happy to answer questions at any point throughout the year. So if governors at any point, whether you're a link governor for safeguarding, SEND or whatever area, if it's within my remit, and obviously all of our remits as exec blur into each other in many ways, I am always happy to answer any questions if you drop me an email or ask via B. Okay, so welcome everybody. The notes will be shared after, but by all means, make notes as we go through. There we go. So this afternoon, semi-evening, I'm hoping to confirm key staff who you should be looking to work with. It's really important to note that not all of you may be link governors for safeguarding, and I will reference this part way through tonight's session. Safeguarding is not just the responsibility of link governors, and I'm very, very aware of the pressure and the weight that link governors for key statutory roles hold on their shoulders. It's a shared responsibility, and in our policy we make that really clear that this isn't just about the link governor for safeguarding. The roles and responsibilities in section 5 of our safeguarding policy, it quite explicitly states it's for trustees and LGBs holistically. There is by all means a job description, if we can call that, it's not really a person spec, roles and responsibilities if you are a link governor, but actually this just extends across the whole local governing body. I'm going to introduce the key KCSiE update, so Keeping Children Safe in Education 2024. If those of you have attended or had delivery from designated safeguarding leads in schools, you might recognise some of this material, but the main focus of tonight is actually on what does that practically look like for LGBs. And I've put there an asterisk next to attendance updates because it's really important that working together to improve school attendance was also released in 2024 and came into effect this academic year. So as much as KCSiE is important, the two are inextricably linked. And for that reason, I'll also revisit our Learning for Life framework, where we absolutely have those two things synonymous really with each other. Also, just some reference points, some points for thinking when going into schools, having those conversations around contextual safeguarding needs, and then there'll be a Q&A session. In that last section, I will cover off some of the mechanisms to support LGBs or things to consider. Okay, so I appreciate I'm the only face on there. That isn't because I'm narcissistic and I only wanted to put my face in there. From a trust perspective, I'm the safeguarding lead, but I am not the only person responsible for safeguarding. So it's really important within your roles, whether that's as a trustee, to know who the other members of the executive team are responsible for safeguarding. Within our executive team, there is myself as the trust safeguarding lead, and there's also Alison Pearson, who's the deputy safeguarding lead. In addition to that, we have a deputy head teacher for the Learning for Life, who is part of our school improvement team, and that is Ashley Happy Hobday. But what the reason for all of the different dots is there should be an extensive team of safeguarding officers within your school. There is always one designated safeguarding lead, and they should be, and it should not must, but it should be somebody that sits on your senior leadership team. Where they don't, they should hold a significant senior role. So it may be somebody that sits in an associate leadership team, but they should absolutely be informing strategic oversight of safeguarding in a school, and therefore it can't only sit with an associate member of staff who doesn't have that mechanism of directing strategic management of safeguarding. It's also really important as trustees and LGBs that we understand the necessary resource. That includes time, that might include money, that includes access to training opportunities, not just for the self-development, but for the development of team that safeguarding holds within the school. So it's really important that in addition to the safeguarding lead, there are an appropriate number of safeguarding officers across the school. Question about do they need to be a qualified teacher? No, they don't have to be a qualified teacher. However, what tends to be the case in leadership teams, particularly in secondaries, is that the member of staff that is the safeguarding lead would often sit on senior leadership, and by that very nature are often a teaching member of staff. In all of our primary schools, the designated safeguarding lead is the head teacher, because even though it isn't an essential, it isn't a must, in order to direct staff who have a teaching responsibility, you really should be able to develop and deliver to people that are working within that remit, not just associate staff. So it's a should, not a must, but great question, Adrian. Okay, so KCSiE this year, and I think Andy asked a question that I'll be covering in this section just before the training tonight. The updates to KCSiE this year are quite minimal. Last year was quite significant. Next year we anticipate it will be significant again. There's some significant case reviews that have happened, which we anticipate will lead into significant changes to KCSiE, specifically around closed cultures, which I can unpick a little bit more for you. But the updates as they stood this year, there were 4 significant updates. The first is the amended definition of safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children. And that was brought into line with Working Together to Safeguard Children that was published late in 2023. That will come out in the notes, and I will show it in a moment. We won't delve into that, just the changes. Similarly, the additional information as to when children may require early help, again, similarly, in relation to as is the case in Working Together to Safeguard Children. There is a real focus and drive in the updates in KCSiE on early intervention, early identification, early intervention. This aligns with the green paper that was released around SEND and alternative provision, which also features in KCSiE this year, where the focus is on the right support at the right time by the right people in the right place. And so ultimately, in order to give the right support at the right time, it indicates that we have to intervene and identify needs early. That is absolutely in line with our Learning for Life framework, the concept of which is to remain a slow down the Learning for Life framework or off it, rather than travelling up it. And I'll cover that in more detail in a moment. There's also a recommendation, and it is a recommendation for schools to use the DfE data protection guidance for schools to understand data protection. There were no significant changes required to our data protection policy and how we operate or work within GDPR, and there is a designated officer for that. So although we won't cover that in detail, that was one of the recommendations. And finally, there was clarification that schools continue to be responsible for the safeguarding of children that they place in alternative provision. This is particularly pertinent to secondaries and for our specialist school, where the access or utilisation of alternative provision is utilised far more than it is in our primaries. We have a really strong system, and within the safeguarding policy, Appendix E outlines all of the checks that have to be conducted prior to the utilisation of alternative provision and the checks that have to be done across the period of the utilisation of alternative provision. This is a massive area as well for Ofsted, a key focus for Ofsted and a key focus for local authorities. So it's really important that within the realm of safeguarding, but this is also within the realm of people that might oversee curriculum design, might oversee or be LGB links around data and outcomes. Actually, this is what is the provision for the child, and then how are we safeguarding children where the sole provision is not our school. With regards to the definition is here, but it's also in our safeguarding policy, and you can obviously access it within KCSiE. So safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children is defined for the purposes of the guidance as, and I'm not going to cover off all of the definition, that's for you to, you can go and look at that. I also don't want to just read to you. However, the key changes are, and they are underlined, providing help and support to meet the needs of children as soon as problems emerge. Now, as somebody that might be going in to check, actually, how effective are we for safeguarding? My questions would be, well, what concerns are we seeing for our children wholesale? And how are we ensuring systematically as a school we're identifying them as soon as possible? So what contextual understanding do we have for each of our children? What oversight, what data are we scrutinising in order to make sure we identify concerns before they escalate? And then the second question is, and what support do we offer? Because ultimately what this is an emphasis, what the emphasis is here is that we offer that support, we meet those needs. And what that doesn't rely on is actually, do we need to always use external agencies? Are there things we can do internally to meet those needs sooner? The second significant change is protecting children from maltreatment. There is the additional information here of whether that is within or outside the home, including online. So it's really important within our behaviour policy, there is a real focus in legislation changes in 2022 around giving schools the opportunity to intervene, respond to, support and penalise, give consequences where there are things that take place outside of the school walls. Absolutely, there can be things that are put in place. We were very careful as a trust not to actually place too much emphasis on taking sole responsibility for that. And why was that important? If we said within our policy that we will respond to actions that are outside of school, we said we may, actually we could then very easily be the ones that are placed centre to solving all of the problems on behalf of health and care. So police matters, social care matters, early help matters, etc. So we absolutely have included that in our behaviour policy that we can act on those things, and schools should always understand all of the contextual safeguarding information, but it isn't our sole responsibility. What should be happening within the school is really effective work with multi-agencies, understanding our place to support within that early help arena, social care referrals, etc. Any questions on anything so far? Mark, you're on mute, sorry.
You're right, Amy, about us not having sole responsibility. But in actual fact, given the current climate and the withdrawal of external agencies, we often find ourselves in a position where we do have sole responsibility. And clearly that has to change, because we can't be everything, unfortunately, to everyone. But the fundamental bit about keeping our children safe has to be the driver.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think what is important, and this is happening far more, I had a conversation with the school just the other day where they were concerned that a case had been referred to social care and at a level 4 and had been knocked back to early help. And what was really important was there are mechanisms for escalating our concern. There is an escalation policy within the local area that we can absolutely utilise. how I've worked with schools is, if schools have gone through the escalation policy and timelines there is drift and delay from social care as an example, then absolutely we as a trust then intervene, because we make sure that there is momentum in those escalations to ensure that what is right for the child is centred to the decision making of professionals. So what we've got a really strong system of within our trust, if any schools are unsure about how to move things forward, that's exactly what we do. And obviously, as a large trust within the local authority, and we've worked really hard to forge positive working relationships. And by positive, I don't mean permissive. They are built on trust, challenge, and we absolutely, we don't beat around the bush, and we have had to escalate. There's been a number of cases where that has been the case, and effectively children have, which is often the case, had to be removed from the care of their parents. So we have those mechanisms to support. What's really important is that as a governor, it isn't for you particularly to have to go and do that challenge with a local authority, but where you feel that a designated safeguarding lead, or you're hearing from colleagues that they're looking internal for the resources and they're not there, actually, are you accessing external agencies? And if you were in a position where you thought, oh, I'm not sure our safeguarding team are, and it's perhaps they don't know what they can access, that would absolutely be an appropriate point to say, I'm concerned here. Have a conversation with a head teacher, have a conversation with me. What tends to happen, and I have to say this is for every single school, if a school is ever concerned that something is happening where its local authority or local area agencies aren't fulfilling their role, head teachers, if colleagues within school haven't, often escalate either to myself or exec team, and then we work together to try and resolve it. So that's the fortunate case that we have that mechanism. I worry for schools where they don't have that mechanism, but at the minute when we're thinking as a trust, those mechanisms exist. Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
What's really important, and I think this is really key, and it will come to the script shortly that I've shared with you, is professional curiosity. All colleagues within a school should always be professionally curious. And what that means is we may ask questions at times that can sit uncomfortably for people. And that's exactly the same for LGBs and trustees. Asking the questions means that it requires people to think, have we done enough? Are we doing what is right? And as LGB members, as trustees, I absolutely advocate for people being professionally curious. Sometimes, and if we think about the different leadership areas, people don't know what they don't know. And unless we ask the questions and sometimes we create that uncertainty, actually people can become not complacent through neglect, but complacent just through reliance purely on experience rather than development and growth and access to external agencies. So that professional curiosity is key. Similarly, I'm not going to read all of this, but again, coming back to Linda.
Hi, Amy. There is an issue as regards the safeguarding side of it between the governor's role in being involved in strategic versus the operational side. And I think particularly in the safeguarding link governor role, you have to have an understanding of the operational side of how the school works, and there is a conflict there with the guidance and the role of link governors not to be involved in the operational side. But I personally think that on the safeguarding and SEN, you've really got to know how the operational side works and what's actually involved in it.
So I think, and we'll cover that in part in the script, an example of the script, because you're absolutely right. There has to be the understanding of how operationally things run, but there's a difference, I would say, between understanding how operationally things run to achieve the strategic aims by comparison to being operational in the questions that are asked. Yep. So I think there's a fine margin between being strategic. The responsibility of the LGB is to be strategic in its oversight, but absolutely as a link governor, you would want to interrogate the systems that permit that strategy to be achieved. The layer that sits underneath that can happen is, and we'll talk about this in more detail shortly, safeguarding is very emotive. and where somebody
Yeah.
is trying to offload, and essentially what can end up happening is a link governor meeting or visit can become a supervision session, and that isn't the function of an LGB link governor to supervise. We'll come to that later on, but absolutely you're right. There is a blend of the role, but there's still a distinction between being personally operational or being a supervisor for the DSL.
Yeah, you've got to stand back from it. Yeah,
absolutely. So we'll come to that, but it's a fair point. The additional information that we've already referenced here again is the information around early help. Early help features far more prevalently in KCSiE this time than it has done before. The key changes here are the references to children who go missing or have gone missing, and they now specify from either education, home or care. The previous guidance around children missing from education was very, very woolly, and ultimately what schools should have oversight of is if a child has any instances or any missing episodes, whether that is from education for a period of sessions or whether that is from home or care. What is really, really important here is often we think of, not often, no, I'm going to rephrase that, we don't think of them as separate. Often they're treated separately. And this is children who have experienced multiple suspensions or are at risk of being permanently excluded from schools, whether that's a school or college or alternative provision or pupil referral units. Our Learning for Life framework doesn't reference behaviour within it. It references the root need. Often behaviours are a secondary response to something. Obviously, there's a scale and a spectrum of what that behaviour may look like. But we have to inextricably link behaviour and safeguarding. Ultimately, the aim of the school should be that we encourage all children to come in, and where they can't, we have appropriate provision to meet their needs in order to educate them effectively and not kick children out. That probably sounds quite contentious because we know that there are very high level behaviours that we see in some of our children currently, but it's really looking at what is the root cause of that behaviour and are we effectively safeguarding that child? And when we say we, the collective understanding of all of the circumstances for that child. And then the other addition to this around early help for children that may benefit from early help is for children who has a parent or carer in custody. Now, I would extend that even further as it does here, which is or is affected by parental offending, because the impact on children where their parents are experiencing adverse experiences, whether that is through the access or involvement in the criminal justice system, whether that is their own mental health, is absolutely integral to our understanding. We need to see all of the layers because of the generational impact that can happen on children. Okay. So as I referenced at the beginning, we have, just checking, Linda, is that a legacy hand? It's not, or if you got a question at this point? I just don't want to ignore you with all. Okay, perfect. So they are the key updates to KCSiE. They are quite minimal. It will be more significant next year, no doubt, especially under the new government. And they've got a real focus and lens at the minute on SEND children, rightly so, and on behavioural structures and curriculum within school. The second document that is absolutely important is working together to improve school attendance. As I've already said, it's so important that we focus on bringing children into our school. And I'll cover the national averages last year. It's important to note in all of our secondaries, we were under national average for attendance last year. So I'm not saying anything that isn't easily accessible to all of you. Our persistent absence was also above national average in our secondaries. It was similarly within our specialist school, and in our primaries, we had some that sat above national average, but we had some that were precariously borderline. So it's really important that attendance and our key KPIs that you will have access to for your LGB meetings, and I'll talk about that more in a moment, are a really key focus. It gives us a point of reference to from which we then develop our conversations. Okay, so taking those 2 points about safeguarding and attendance being inextricably linked, they are inextricably linked in our Learning for Life framework. So I can see some squints. I'll share this with B as a JPEG in addition to the PowerPoint, so you can zoom in at your leisure. Our Learning for Life framework was built based on students' needs, basically children's needs. And I think there's a recording still be, and I can share a video link as well explaining what the Learning for Life framework is, how the waves work. Ultimately, if we get this right, we are safeguarding our children. The 5 pillars are inclusive learning, inclusive health and wellbeing, inclusive individual development, inclusive safeguarding and attendance, and inclusive communities. And then within that, we have the waves for children. The intention is that we keep our children on the shore. So the shore that you will now recognise within all of the secondaries, Year 7 model, is taken from the concept of the wave. Ultimately, we want to keep all of our children on the shore. So it is an extended metaphor around a beach and the waves. For those of you involved in secondaries, you'll also potentially recognise the phrase Mat Islands. That is focusing on trying to give children the opportunity for a regulated alternative provision for those that might sit on wave 3 or 4. Ultimately, we want to keep them out of the waves on the shore. So the more that we can do to understand children's needs earlier, we can meet them lower down the waves and then bring them back to the shore. Happy to, I think I'm doing a session on this in January, but it was moved to January, wasn't it? So I'll revisit that then. Again,
I think it's March. I think it's March, Amy, but yes, it's in the diary.
And there are recordings from last year's training, and there is a short recording explaining the wave if you're not familiar with it. Ultimately, each of the waves, pre-wave is our universal offer, what we do for children, for all children. Wave 1 is what adaptations do we put in place. Wave 2 is what interventions do we deliver. Wave 3 is what personalised provision is required, and Wave 4 is our bespoke offer. And then within the pillars, essentially, for tonight's purpose, we're looking at how are all learners supported to attend and keep themselves safe. So a Learning for Life framework already integrates much of the legislation, and this has been in place since 2021, really gained traction in 2023, and we're now embedding in our schools across our trust. Any questions on the Learning for Life framework at this point? We'll continue. You might have questions if you want me to come back to them. So when we're considering our contextual safeguarding needs, that is looking at the child holistically. It would be prudent to lean into and obviously you may live in the communities in which you govern. So you may be able to bring intelligence and knowledge to those discussions. It's really important that we allow and support our staff to look outward, but we bring that intelligence into school as well so that we can see what's on the horizon. So it's important to ask the school what community factors currently are affecting the state of play within the school. There's a lot of work that goes into this. I know some of you are involved in, and some of you might be aware of the For All Foundation. Essentially, that is a massive piece of work around how we affect positively the communities, because what we know in Shropshire, and particularly in certain pockets within Shropshire where some of our schools sit, Shropshire is very resource poor. If you were in Birmingham or you were in an inner city, there's a lot of resource that gets put into schools by charitable organisations, and that isn't as forthcoming in an area with the rural spread of Shropshire, but they do exist, and it's so important that we understand how are our schools looking outward. We also have a reporting system within our schools called CPOMs, so it'd be really interesting to ask in your updates, well, what analytics, what themes are we seeing coming through from CPOMs analysis? There's also within each of our schools 3 mechanisms for capturing child and young person's voice. We have My Voice, which is an annual survey. This year will be run in spring, but there are 2 rounds of data that came last year in every single school that you should have been given an overview of and access to the results of those My Voice surveys. So that's the voice of the individual, My Voice. There's then the Our Voice. So during the trust review window, this window that we're in currently, there is a Our Voice, which is a sample of children across the school who are asked particular questions, and then that is fed back to the school, the findings. So I'd be wanting to know, well, what is the outcome of Our Voice, as well as the other elements of trust review? And then we also have the One Voice. I know some of you very kindly came along to the One Voice, which has representation from all of the schools across our trust, and the children come together to develop a project. each in their individual schools. There's a showcase that is presented in the summer term in July, which all of you are welcome to attend. And then the final aspect, which I believe low-level concerns and closed cultures will definitely feature in next year's KCSiE. Low-level concerns is, well, what systems are in place within the school to recognise where we may see concerns that may not reach the threshold of harm around the conduct of staff? What things might alert us or worry us that actually we need to be aware of and we need to be able to address? Again, it's that professional curiosity. One thing that we will be rolling through this year is an additional part of CPOMs where we will have a recording mechanism linked to CPOMs around low-level concerns. But it'd be interesting to understand. It features on your KPIs currently, but mainly for those that have gone through to LADO, to local area designated officer, as a concern. Okay, so with regards to the attendance, I said I would share these with you. And what's an interesting question to be asking, and this isn't just for safeguarding, this isn't just for people that might have an oversight of attendance, but ultimately if children aren't there, you can't teach them. And there are some caveats to that. There may be specific circumstances where a child is accessing remote education, but it is a rarity. So the national average figures for last year, and again, this will be shared with you, for primaries was 94.6%. And for children who are persistently absent, so that is children who have attendance of 90% or below, the national average was 15.2%. So I'd be having that conversation, well, where were we as a school? And also, by comparison from this point last year, where are we at this point in the year? Are we on a similar trajectory to last year, and therefore are we due to sit underneath national average if we continue on the trajectory we're on? At secondary, the national average was 91.3% and persistent absence was 26.7%. Now, in a lot of our secondaries, we were in the 30s for persistent absence. There is an Adrian raised the other day. There is also severe absenteeism. So that's for children where their attendance is below 50%. And I will clear up, I replied, but Adrian was right to raise about the reviews, something around the phraseology of chronic, which I'll come to later on. And then in our specialist school, in specialist schools, 87.1 with a persistent absence rate of 37.6. This is all published on the KPIs. So it's really important that we keep that steady, look at how is our attendance changing throughout the year. What is really clear is the impact of attendance or non-attendance on outcomes. The two are inextricably linked and particularly pertinent for children where they have socioeconomic disadvantage. Ultimately, if we don't have an eye on our people premium cohort, and that is just the children that are recognised as people premium, there will be children that are peripheral to access to something that would label them as people premium, for example, free school meals over the last 6 years. It's so important that we have that close analysis of attendance. So what importance is schools placing on attendance? And particularly within our primary schools, where we perhaps rely massively on the power of personality and relationships, how analytical are our schools around the attendance of children to make macro decisions to impact upon attendance positively? Okay. Any questions at this point? I am nearly at the end where I'm delivering and then some key ideas for us to consider. Ultimately, this is really important, and this for me is something cultural to be picking up within LGB visits, LGB meetings, understanding from the communities in which we live. How do staff at the school build relationships with children and their families? The language that comes in and how people may describe children is absolutely pivotal to our understanding of the culture of the school. And it's really interesting, especially if you're not widely known by children within your school, to just do a visit and do a culture walk, just walk and feel the site. You get a real feeling for how do you feel children feel their sense of belonging positively or negatively within the school. Okay, so they're the key updates, the key legislation and reference points. So with regards to governance of safeguarding, this is within our safeguarding policy. This is section 5. And obviously there is, as Linda's referenced as well, there are different mechanisms within our trust because there is the trust board, there is myself as designated safeguarding leader who strategically oversees safeguarding in our schools, and then we also have LGBs. So it is absolutely important, the role of safeguarding governor, but equally, there are some key things that can really make this job A, effective, but B, manageable. These for me are the key questions, and these sit on I don't know if I put it in here, on the LGB visit pro forma. So ultimately what we want to know is, what is the school tracking? And when I say school, that doesn't mean the KPI document. The KPI document is what every school is required to track as part of our trust. But there may be other data that the school is tracking. For example, previous years, it may have indicated that there is a real concern around white British boys and their underachievement, and with that, their underattainment, and they may not be coming up as a safeguarding concern, but there are some community risks. So in addition to the KPIs, what is the school tracking? And do we believe it's the right thing? As LGBs, you will have a lot of intelligence from those meetings where things won't feel right, or there'll be something that you think, oh, I'm not sure if we've got a finger on the pulse of that concern. So what is being tracked? What does it tell us? Now, our schools, by and large, are, through our KPIs, really good at tracking, because KPIs happen. They have to track those things. And sometimes schools can be, and it's often the case, schools are really good at finding the trends and the threads. But the key point is what is happening about it. So for me, it would be a concern if I was having a conversation around safeguarding and we could see that we had a lot of children that were on early help, a lot of children on child in need, child protection. We had a significant number of harmful sexual behaviours, or we had community issues that were being discussed. And the school said, well, actually, we can't do anything about it. It's happening in the community. But ultimately, what's happening in the community is affecting the school. So how is the school trying to affect the thing that's having the greatest impact within school? It's so important that we lean past that sense of that discomfort to say, but what are we doing? Because if the answer is, well, not anything really, because it's somebody else's responsibility, as Mark made the point, often school is that last hope. So we need to be pulling the mechanisms and the levers of talking to the wider community, or we need to be looking at the mechanisms to be able to support our children in the time that we have them within school, or forging those really close relationships with families that perhaps have only ever experienced disaffection. The rigidity of that relationship of we're the educator or we're the school and you're the family, and that potentially acrimonious relationship is not going to benefit anyone. So leaning into that and working in different ways for what is typically called a hard to reach family. Well, how hard did we reach? And if we couldn't reach in that direction, how did we go around the issue to try and affect change? So it's so important that we don't just rely on the fact that things are really hard, things are really stretched, or the people aren't doing their roles. Actually, what we're doing to affect change. So once somebody has done something about it, what was the impact and how do we know? And for me, what tends to be the case, and I'm going to do a really broad brushstroke here, and there are exceptions to this, and there's some phenomenal practice. All of our safeguarding teams are phenomenal, I hasten to add. But what typically happens within the pastoral arena is they're not very good at tracking quantitatively. So we rely a lot on qualitative statements. We rely a lot on experiential impact. So, oh, well, the children, it feels better at the minute. Oh, the children are being more well managed, etc. So it's really important that when we are looking for impact, well, how can we track that quantitatively? What data can we put behind that to ensure that we're indicating a significant shift? And more often than not, the issue is that we didn't put the quantitative measurements in initially, which means we can't capture them at the end. It isn't that they can't happen, it's just that we perhaps didn't think of it in that way. How do we baseline the circumstance, and then how do we measure the impact of it? And My Voice was a really key indicator of that, where people genuinely did seek to impact upon the initial baseline survey. Often you could see a measurable impact. Where they didn't, and the actions weren't really targeted to improve the data initially, the impact was negligible. So that insight that so many of you will have from your experience outside of work, outside of your governing or trustee roles, whether that's in business, finance, whatever it is absolutely key in this, because often the thing is that people can't quantitatively measure the impacts of that work. And as I say, that is a broad brushstroke. That isn't to say that's the case everywhere, but it is quite a lot of typicality. Okay, so coming into that governance role, one of the key aspects of the governance role, and it is within policy, is the link governor role. There is the expectation of a termly visit. And within that is, I'm going to come back to this in a second, there is the visitor pro forma. In the grey boxes is the additionality of those questions that I've basically posted for you. So it is a routine. It's essentially assessing the situation, asking what the plans are to affect change, and then once they've done it, reviewing the impact of it. It's assess, plan, do, review, ultimately, the cycle of the questioning. So this has been shared with you as a handout, and I'll leave it as a reference point for you to come back to, but you can have a quick look at it. There are 2 worked examples, and I'm just going to give 5 minutes for you to have a quick read of the 2 worked examples and then feedback your thoughts. So this is the first one. I'll change it in a moment for those not accessing it via the email that I've shared with you. If people would rather I read it, although I'm sure you're sick of my voice, by all means put it in the chat, but I'm going to be. And I'll change the screen for you who are reading it here. This is the second worked example. Okay, so don't worry if you haven't got all the way through, and if you still need a little bit of time, let me know. I've tried to read along, but I appreciate I skim and scan sometimes. Is there anything that anybody notices between the 2 worked examples of essentially the same meeting? Anybody would like to volunteer? Sarah?
Yeah, I thought the second one was much more the critical friend that we're meant to be as governors. It was more the bigger picture, strategic, and whereas the first one almost going down rabbit holes into the particular the details of each case, which really is not really necessarily our business. We just need to make sure that the help for both child and staff is in place, and we've got the right strategies and procedures in place overall. So I much prefer the second example.
I'm really pleased. Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the second one is definitely the more professional approach. The one that worried me on the first one was the questioning of social services was totally blank. But there was far too much oversharing of information for what should be a confidential item. You know, is an government. The government do not need that level of information.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important as well. As you said, and as you've all noticed, and I'll come to Nikki in a second, the second one is far more formal, is far more strategic. But there are some real important nuggets within the first one as well. And I think Andy's already identified one thing. Part of our role as LGBs, as trustees, exec, is that we develop our staff to think in a more strategic way as well. So if somebody actually is divulging too much and we think actually this isn't where we need to go, putting in those boundaries about what is the purpose of this visit, it isn't supervision, and that can be done in a supportive way, but actually we don't need to go down those rabbit holes. Nikki.
Thanks. Yeah, the other thing I spotted, and agree with everything everyone said, is that the first one feels like maybe it's a bit more human, feels a bit more kind in the moment, but actually it's not. Colleague that talks about being critical friend, that's what we need to be, because we're not really helping them in the long term otherwise.
Absolutely. And I think as much as I've created the two worked examples of the same circumstance, they are quite light in shade. Absolutely, we have to be human. And I think the speed at which the link governor says, it's really distressing. Thanks for keeping me informed. However, we're moving on. But for me, it absolutely is that case of, have you got the appropriate resources? In so many of our schools, so many schools nationally, supervision isn't prioritised because people are too busy. They don't want to fund the supervision, or safeguarding leads don't think they need it. There are mechanisms and different formats of creating supervision scenarios. But the second one, there were nuggets in the first one that were alarming to me around, we're keeping an eye on what was a low level concern about a member of staff. So I think it's really important that there has to be a balance. But as Linda was saying, what we wouldn't want to be is so operational that we're getting into the nitty gritty of every case. What we have to understand is, what are the mechanisms for achieving the end game of solid safeguarding systems? So I put the worked examples in and I've shared those with you because I think sometimes it's good to just have a bit of a reference point as a reminder of, okay, am I sense checking how I'm approaching those meetings? And sometimes being quite formal with the approach. I know many of you work in this way anyway, of what's our agenda when we come in? What do I want to know? And potentially even sharing a couple of questions before with the safeguarding lead to say, can we look at these when I come in, so that they come to the meeting prepared? Because especially when somebody has run off their feet, they've got many different hats, head teachers within primary or very, very busy in different remits within secondary, that they might just turn up to the meeting and be a little bit like, I don't know what our function of our meeting is supposed to be. So I think it's really important that it's that reciprocity of, what are my expectations? Similarly, what does the DSL think they're expecting from that meeting, and having that mutual agreement of its purpose. So thank you for coming with me on that. So with regards to your meetings, although on the performer it identifies the section 175, which is a massive audit document, the KPI that you have access to as part of your LGBs is a great starting point. So within the alternative provision section, ultimately what we want to know is, if we've got a number of children that are out at alternative provision, well, are we understanding what the needs of those children were to mitigate against them having to utilise alternative provision anyway? So how do we understand the needs and how are we meeting the needs? That also relates to teaching and learning expectations within the school, curriculum design within the school. So this is why it's so important that safeguarding isn't just the responsibility of a link governor for safeguarding. We can be exploring aspects of safeguarding through all aspects of our school. Similarly, with regards to behaviour, well, how many children have been in MATI? How many children have been suspended? How many children are missing learning experiences? Because what we don't want to do is kick them out. But if we're seeing massive behaviours, well, how are we affecting change in that within our schools? Are our systems tight enough? Is our expectation high enough? Is our support mechanism there? Have we trained our staff appropriately? Have we leaned into the vulnerability of meeting with parents and putting in suitable challenge with suitable support? Similarly with attendance, how are we bringing them in? If we're not above national average or even meeting national average, why? Why is it different? What are the barriers and how are we overcoming them? And then ultimately, with regards to our incidents, if we have spikes in prejudice incidents, if we have spikes in sexual-based incidents, bullying incidents, well, how are we monitoring and tracking that? And it comes back to the assess, plan, do, review. So what are we finding here? What are we planning to make to do to affect change? And then how will we know that we have affected that change? And ensuring, you'll see at the end of the second worked example, we are pinpointing in the next meeting, we are going to circle back to what we've discussed today to monitor the impact of this work. Because what tends to happen is people are very, very busy. They'll talk about what's happening, and then perhaps nobody brings them back to then indicate, well, what was the change that was affected at that point? Where that does happen, that is fantastic, provision and approach. Okay, so I've covered this before. So I'm rounding up at this point and we'll come to question and answers. One of the things that has been shared with all clerks to governors and with head teachers, designated safeguarding leads is in autumn 2, spring 2 and summer 2, there is a safeguarding and attendance review that we're conducting across all schools. And in the calendar invites that may have just been forwarded on to you, these are the foci that we are going to be exploring. All of this is subject to change. If we think that there is a key theme that's coming in across our trust or in individual schools, we might change the focus slightly. However, this is an open invite to link governors or other LGB members that may want to come and observe, be a part of those reviews. Because what I absolutely appreciate is the daunting task of going in and asking the right questions at the right time. These are key concepts that we think are going to be prudent to review at those points across the year. So it isn't for you to come with, there's no expectation on LGBs to absolutely be there, members of LGB to be there. Obviously, if we've got 11 members of an LGB rocking up and we're trying to do a review, we might have to consider how we do that. I doubt that would be the case that so many en masse because of the time commitment I appreciate. But this is to help you to see if you want that opportunity of what kind of questions will we be asking and what is the intent behind those questions at that point. I just wanted to circle back because Adrian asked a question that was really, really valid, which was, and I can't find it now. Oh, there it is, in autumn 2. So here on the third bullet point, the concept of chronic absenteeism. And Adrian emailed to say, I can't see it in the DfE guidance. Absolutely great. Love the fact that people are checking that. Persistent absences, children who attend less 10% away from 100% absence, so 90% or below. Severe absenteeism is 50% or below. So they are in this DfE framework. You won't find the language of chronic absenteeism there. Why are we using chronic absenteeism? Well, we're really fortunate in our trust that we have many children that come from our primary schools and feed into our secondary schools. We're also really lucky that we have systems that we can access the attendance of children before they come to our schools. And especially with the SURE in our secondaries, we have the amazing transition programs that have been designed to know more about the children before they even get to our SURE. In primary schools, we often have, in many of our schools, we have families that pass through our system. So we might have had John Boy, who is with us now, but we might have had Jilly that was with us 2 years ago, where as a family, absence was a significant issue. Chronic absenteeism is not just within that year. We only measure PA and severe absence within the academic year, but it would be remiss of us to ignore the fact that a child in year 9 has had absence in year 7 and year 8 and we've done nothing about it, because we've now got massive holes in learning, lost learning and potential contextual issues that we need to address. So when we're talking about chronic absence, that isn't particularly under the guidance over a year-long tracking. It is absence over a period of time, because sure as anything, that is going to have a bigger impact than a one-in-year absence as a result of an illness at a certain point. So chronic absence is absence that is chronic. It's something that we really need to try and affect and get right into the root of to affect significant change, probably requires significant support for the family. Okay, so that is my delivery to you and all of the key points about access to support that you as LGB members can have via me, via other people that might be coming out as part of the reviews. And now I will stop sharing, and if you can stop recording, B, if anybody has any questions, I'm really happy to answer them.